It was so empowering. I can't even describe it. To be able to be out and gay in the public in the middle of the city in the sunshine, it was incredible.
Hello, I am Kay Anderson, and you are listening to Lost Spaces, the podcast that mourns the death of queer nightlife. Here is how it goes. Every single week, I talk to a different person about a venue from their past, the memories that they created there, and the people that they used to know. But this week we are doing something a little different. We are not going to a Lost Queer club. We are not going to a Lost Queer pub. We are not even going to a community drop-in center. We are getting our swimsuits on and we are headed to a Lost Queer beach. And I wish I could say that I planned this episode to tie in with the heat wave in the UK, but I didn't. It's all purely coincidental. But if you are listening to this when we are in the midst of a heat wave, I hope that it evokes thoughts of being cool by the water. Don't know what I'm going with that. The Belmont Rocks were large limestone rocks on the lakefront of Lake Michigan in Chicago that served as a gathering place for the LGBTQ plus community for decades. We're talking from the 60s, we're talking pre-Stonewall from the 60s, we're talking all through the AIDS epidemic right up until 2003, when all of the rocks were removed and the whole thing was demolished due to the erosion of the rocks and the danger that that posed. Which means that there is no longer a queer beach there. But a really cool thing has happened. The writer Owen Keehnen has set up a Facebook page called A Place for Us, which is gathering people's photos and memories of spending time at the Belmont Rocks and just being, you know, like how important just being is. I was lucky enough to catch up with Owen to talk about moving to Chicago in the early 80s when his one ambition was to get a job at Ripley's Believe It or Not. He mentioned that quite a few times. What it was like coming out in the AIDS epidemic and why it was so important for him to have access to an outdoor space. Oh, and if you are having trouble visualizing large slabs of limestone rocks by the water, don't worry, I've got your back. Just go to my Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook accounts. My profile is Lost Spaces Pod across all three, where I have shared some photos of what the Belmont Rocks were like. And whilst you're there, why not, you know, give me a little bit of a follow and some lovin', yeah? All right, let's get into it.
For me, there was always that terror of coming out makes yourself vulnerable, and vulnerable means possibility of rejection. And I'm very, very sensitive that way. I mean, I wish I could say I was more bold in all of it, but I was really scared. You know, it's one of those things where it's like the easiest thing in the world, or it was for me to put off. Because it's sort of like once you go, you can't really go like, oh, yeah, I was just kidding. Or, you know, I don't think anyone was surprised at all.
But you needed to have established yourself in another city and have built a life before you could open up in that way.
I always had that. I think I'm the youngest in my family.
You think you're the youngest in your family?
Oh, I mean, I'm the youngest in my I'm the youngest in my family, so I think that's always been an issue for me. You know, sort of that you get to high school and all your brothers and sisters have been there before, that kind of thing.
That's interesting.
But it's a very Catholic school thing.
Okay, let's unpack it a bit more so I can understand, because I am also the youngest child, so maybe some of this will resonate with me. Do you mean like because everyone else in the family has already done everything, nothing that you do seems that exciting?
No, I mean it like if you're the youngest, you're seen, whether you like it or not, in comparison to those who came before you. So it's like, your brother was good at sports, you be good at sports. Your brother was good at math, you should be good at math. So it's more a matter of needing to establish your own worth independent of whatever people are seeing you through, if that makes any sense. Like, I didn't want to be seen through the filter of my siblings. I didn't want to be known because of them, and establishing your own identity, especially for me, because I was very quiet and very introverted, was a big challenge, especially if you're shy like that, too. Because it's easy to sort of
just fade into the background.
Kind of. And actually, there was a lot of times where I was very comfortable with that, truthfully. So,
yeah.
It's kind of a superpower at times, too.
To be invisible. Yeah. Yeah, I get that.
Yes. It's a superpower and a super hindrance at the same time.
Oh, a super hindrance.
Like all superpowers are, I guess.
And so then, had you just been laying low in high school and then in college? Or had you experimented or tried to push the boundaries and figure out who you were?
Oh, God. Yeah. There were no boundaries. I was very much active, especially in college and through all that. And I also in college fell in love, and that made a big difference too. Young love's a weird thing. It was for me, because I think I romanticized a lot of times things that weren't love. But at the same time, there's the instances of love where you're like, oh, okay, that's what that was. It's more like, as I get older, I'm kind of redefining it, I guess.
Oh, so what's your current definition?
Of love? With my husband, it's somebody who I feel completely safe with. Like, the world can be so crazy. If there's somebody who's just always supportive, always on your side, even with disagreements, being supportive. When I was younger, I mean, it's your young version of love. So you're like, a stripper with a drug addict, sign me up. It was like, I wanted hot, I wanted flashy, I wanted drama.
There is something when you're younger about your own validation being wrapped up in what your idea of love is, right? Like, if I can find love, then I am worthy, rather than I am worthy and then love comes from that.
The only thing I have to say is that my version of love was that it was always very dramatic. It was always operatic. It was always, And I tell you, the older I've gotten, it's the opposite. I mean, love is the even keel, not the blips. It really is. It's that stability that especially a lot of people like myself need because of the world, I guess.
Oh, man. So tell me about this stripper with a drug habit. Was that just an illustrative?
I'm just kidding.
Okay.
No, but it was that sort of, I wanted excitement. Like, the last thing I wanted to do was have something, quiet and stable.
And so what was this relationship then in university? Was that of the more dramatic variety?
It was dramatic, but it was dramatic in a different way. That was dramatic in the tortured writers' bohemian school of, we're in love and we're going to move to San Francisco and live in a commune. That version of drama.
And so did you agree that on the second date?
No, I was serious. That had been a dream of mine before I had met Kevin. My actual dream to start off with was I really wanted to be part of the factory.
Oh, okay.
With Andy Warhol, that scene. But of course, I was all that wasn't around. But that was sort of what dazzled me. But the thought of just sort of living in a big gay commune in San Francisco, sign me up. And then that's right when sort of AIDS happened, truthfully. You know, it was like seeing that whole dream sort of crumble. You know what I mean? I mean, if you thought of moving to San Francisco at that time, it just became just something very different than it was even 2 or 3 years before.
And so had that contributed to your decision to move to Chicago?
That contributed to my decision to leave town because I just wanted a fresh start. And it wasn't going to be the commune in San Francisco. So.
And so what do you remember the most about those first days? What was the feeling?
Of the big city?
Yeah.
This gives you a good idea of just, it's so silly. So I got there and I'm like, I'm a writer, of course. I'm coming to the big city, right? So if you learn anything about those first few days, they were like, journaling was very omnipresent. And I just remember one hokey thing. I was in Chicago and I'm like, writing my thoughts. And I'm at this fast food restaurant. I think it was a Burger King that isn't there anymore. But it was at the intersection of Hollywood and Broadway. And I remember, it's like a Burger King. And I remember thinking, like, wow, Hollywood and Broadway. It was that kind of like, there was an excitement to it that was very new. And I came to the city with open arms. I did not come hesitant or anything. I was throwing myself into it.
And did the city have open arms for you?
Eventually. Ooh. I mean, there were some pretty rough times. One time I was living in a place that was a big warehouse that was being redone that was huge and dusty and had windows, but no glass on the windows. So like living in that, I know. It was an old furniture factory, and so it was like dusty. And truthfully, hard times like that, for me, were a really good thing to go through because things like that really test your reliance. And the more experiences, like looking back like that, I'm like, things might be bad now, or I might be short of money or something, but I can look back and say, well, that was probably worse.
Or at least I have windows now, yeah.
At least I'm very nice. Panes of glass and everything.
And so you'd waited until you got to Chicago to come out properly. What was that like?
The best way I can describe it right there is gray.
Oh.
Everything was so gray before that about coming out. Like, people knew and they kind of did. It was more like that's when I formally just
So gray as in ambiguous, not gray as in like depressing?
No, gray as in ambiguous. More like non-committal would be better than gray. It was a different era, too. It was when all that happened, when I came to Chicago, too, it was just when all the stuff with AIDS was really getting a lot of attention. So when you came out at that period, it's also really important to think you were coming out at a really scary time. People were saying some nuts stuff in that period, like quarantine caps nuts.
Yes, yeah.
It's easy to forget that coming out was one thing, but also especially coming out at that point in time, that was a consideration too. It was just like, if you fear rejection, if you have all the stigma that was happening at the same time attached to it, it was even more of like a albatross.
But still, everyone kind of knew already anyway.
Yeah.
So when you came out, what was the response? Oh, really? Oh, okay.
No, that's not true. That's not true. Everyone was very supportive, but I don't think anyone was surprised. It's so funny. Hindsight's so 20/20. I wish I could have known the end result. It would have just like changed things for so long.
What do you mean?
Meaning that I wouldn't be rejected.
So knowing that you wouldn't be rejected would have changed the way you approached it.
Yeah.
Did any of those fears about being rejected ever go away, or are they still with you?
Oh, I think they're still with me. I think at some level, I'm a people pleaser. Given the choice, I'd rather people like me than not, I guess.
So you'd rather people like you than defend your
No,
point.
I said given the choice. That depends on what my conditions are for the friendship. But I mean, if I can be myself around someone and we get along, that's great. But if someone doesn't like me, I'm not going to beat myself up about it, but I prefer that they do.
I've only recently started to realize that I don't have to be right in every conversation. I used to prioritize being correct rather than having a frictionless experience with someone, which means that I didn't, make very many friends in my 20s. But, there you go. So you described the period of being in the closet as grey. Was coming out like a rainbow?
No. No. When I came out, it was more like a formal acknowledgement. I mean, I was living right in the middle of the gay ghetto. I was working at, there was nothing clear cut like that.
Okay, so it was less like liberation and more like, oh, I did that thing and now I can cross it off my list.
The liberation was already there. I mean, the liberation was my own liberation, and a lot of that came from living in an LGBTQ neighborhood when I eventually moved to Lakeview in Chicago, and earlier than that, discovering the Belmont Rocks. Mm-hmm. I mean, discovering a queer space of that size was really big for me.
So tell me about when you found it. How did you first hear about Belmont Rocks?
I didn't hear about the Belmont. The first time I happened upon the Belmont Rocks, I was still trying to get in, to Ripley's Believe It or Not museum. So that early in Chicago. So I'm like, well, maybe they don't hire me because I'm not that tan. So I put suntan lotion all over it. I'm just going to walk around the city and get a really nice tan. And going out on job interviews, I'll be the belle of the ball.
Sound logic.
Sound 20s logic. So I'm walking along the lakefront and walking down this underpass, and I get to Diversey Harbor, which is, a nice harbor area. And then you go through an underpass, and then you went up a hill, and there was of all things, a gun club, which looked like a fort. Yeah.
Oh.
Anyway. So, and then you walked a little bit further than that. And I tell you, I got, at that point, my gaydar was like a 5-alarm
bing,
fire.
Bing, bing,
I mean,
bing,
you
bing,
could,
bing.
oh my God, you could see guys up where the Belmont Rocks were. And so I walked over, and it was like the Belmont Rocks were these terraced, enormous limestone blocks that were probably 8 feet by 3 feet and probably 5 feet thick. I mean, they're huge. And they were terraced, but the erosion from Lake Michigan had worn them down. So they became like these, they were like falling into the lake, but some parts were preserved and at other points, rocks would dip down. It was really, really just very interesting looking area. And this lakefront area, this terrace of stones goes from Diversey Harbor to Belmont Harbor, which is 4 city blocks. It also goes from the lakefront to where the bike path is, which includes the grassy area that's probably 150 feet to the west. So it's a really big area. And there's laughter, and there's, boom boxes, and there's, Speedos galore. It's just this organic queer space, and it's around right in the middle of the city at the same time when our bars still had blackened windows. I mean, just the fact of gathering out there in the sunshine, it was so empowering. I can't even describe it. To be able to be out and gay in the public in the middle of the city in the sunshine, it was incredible.
So you got there, your gaydar went off, and you were like, oh, I think something's going on here. What did you do next?
Went over, rolled out my towel, and hello.
You just dove in.
I was there, yeah. This was my sunny day activity for 5 years.
Did you get to talking to anyone?
Eventually. I mean, it was easy to meet people there. There was cruising going on, and there were people talking, and it was fun, and there were people swimming, and it was easy to engage on a lot of different levels. I found it very welcoming. To me, this sort of thing was what I thought of when I thought of community.
And so Thinking of fun times at the Rocks, are there
Uh-huh.
any particular stories that you could share with me about things you got
That
up
I
to
could share
that you're willing to share?
on a podcast. Um, it was always a good time. You hooked up sometimes you hung out with friends, sometimes you got stoned. With the rocks reconfiguring, if you looked at the Belmont Rocks, like if you stood at one end of that, say, 4 block stretch, because they're arcing too. So imagine that, like kind of a cove. So the rocks
Mm-hmm.
are curving. If you look down towards the end of the rocks, there would be invisible spots because along the way, different rocks had buckled inward, so there'd be dips. So you could be doing something invisible to the sight line. Another thing
Doing
about
something
that
like
rock,
what?
like sex. I don't know, or whatever taboo. But one of the things too was that because of that green stretch between the bike path and the lip of the Belmont Rocks, that ledge before they terrace down to the lake, you could see police cars or mopeds or whatever approaching. And there was community watching each other. Those people who I talked about seeing them people sat on that top ledge and watched out to let people know if somebody was coming. I mean, it was really this sort of sweet little sleazy community service that was nice. No, but I mean anything. Like people could be getting high or I don't know, having a beer, whatever, whatever that would cause a ruckus. But
So my question was about whether or not there were any of your stories, and you've spoken quite generally. Does that mean you're hiding something from me?
about my stories at the Rocks,
Yeah, yeah.
well, a lot of them were pretty tawdry, but I can't. No one thing stands out in particular. I will. Okay, here. Wait, I take that back. So one summer, what had happened was these rocks buckled. Okay, imagine those buckling rocks terracing down to the lake. The waves coming in. What had happened was they had made like a cave that you could sort of go in.
Oh,
and
okay.
because of the placement of the blocks against each other, there was like a line of light coming through. So imagine yourself standing in like shoulder deep water with like kind of a grotto above, where you can see light coming through above you. And it wasn't a big thing, but made out with someone in that cave. I like that because it was very sort of
Like a movie.
that was memorable, I will say. Well, I was terrified too, because of course all I could see was somebody's going to walk on that block and it's going to cave in, that kind of thing. You're fine.
Well, I mean, it's no fun unless there's danger involved. So we've talked about that as a physical space, but then there's also this digital space that you've created and found other people that remember the Belmont Rocks and want to share their stories.
It was just incredible because then I became part of all this. So then you're like part of the whole experience, and then other people who come to town discover the rocks and then they're a part of the experience. It became this incredible thing. And it wasn't until, truthfully, I moved out of the neighborhood and then I went down there in 2000, maybe 6 years ago. But anyway, the Belmont Rocks have been bulldozed in 2003. Because of the shoreline revetment to prevent erosion. So when I went there 5 years ago, I took a picture of beautiful day, gorgeous sun, nice, warm out. Took a picture of the Belmont Rocks, flat, like a landing strip. A little bit of a terrace, but not a whole lot. Just, all completely redone. Not a single person there. No one. So I took a picture of that. I had pictures from the Belmont Rocks because I used to go there all the time. I posted a picture of what they look like now versus bare bones Belmont Rocks with no one on them that I took, 30 years ago or whatever. And I said, are the rocks dead? And people started responding. And what it was I thought this place meant a lot to me, but I didn't really think of it like as a queer space until then, but people started, responding and telling stories, and then people started sharing pictures, and then I shared some more pictures, and then it became a Facebook page which became a place for us. And truthfully, I'm always shocked that it meant as much to other people as it did to me. I really am. I mean, it's truly, it's a queer space that's discovered itself. I mean, I didn't do anything except set up the Facebook page, truthfully. I mean, there isn't a whole lot other to do than that. I mean, just given the digital queer space, people seemed very interested and eager to sort of recreate that, you know, the real rocks in another form.
So in 2003, when it was initially leveled, do you remember hearing about that? Like, was there a community outcry?
I was completely disengaged.
Okay.
And I think there was somewhat of an outcry. The local alderman, Tom Tunney, and a local activist, Charlotte Neufeld, did their best to preserve some of those big limestone slabs that had some of the artwork on them. Because that was another thing about the Belmont Rocks. So these big limestone slabs also became this kind of open air queer art gallery. But I mean, beautiful artwork all over them, you know, just so lovely. And the interesting thing was, is since it was on limestone, it was a gallery that had sort of a natural showing length of time, meaning that like 2 years in lakefront elements will, you know, wear down a layer of limestone pretty quickly. But yes, and that was such a huge part of it. So that became important, and I got some great pictures about that. So a lot of this is just trying to say, especially for the future, going like, this is this magical place that existed that just is not anymore. It isn't like headline making. You know, it wasn't like front page news, but it was more important because it's part of people's personal history. You know, it's But it's that kind of personal history that falls through the cracks, you know, and just gets lost, and that pains me deeply. I really think it's a way how you connect with people and get the sense of loss. You know, if you to understand loss, you have to understand the life that was lost. You know what I mean? Like these were people having fun, vibrant people lost. I mean, they were not statistics. They were people doing things. And I think sometimes that can be glossed over. And I don't know. It rubs me the wrong way. It's, you know, because they deserve a lot more than that. I'm sorry.
And so what did having access to that space mean to you?
It meant invitation. It meant like an invitation to community. And I don't know if I can put it in any other way than that. Like this wasn't just, you know, somewhere where everyone just hung out, but there was a bigger thing going on here. There was a lot more interaction. You know, it wasn't all just sexual. That was the thing that made it so amazing. It wasn't all just gay men. Everybody hung out there. And they all, you know, after the sun went down, a whole different crowd came in. And after the bars closed, a whole different crowd would come in and wait for the sun to come up. And then the sun worshipers would come in, you know, and sometimes they overlapped. But it was truly like a community center, kind of. I mean, not that formal, but a lot of the same functions, maybe. A lot of organizations, bars had their picnics there, you know. It was fun.
And if you could go back in time and ran into Owen on that very first day that he discovered the Belmont Rocks, ready to get a tan and get a job at Ripley's Believe It or Not, what advice would you give him?
Cut your mullet.
No, don't do it, Owen. Don't do it. Don't do it. Leave it.
Oh, it was full on John Stamos. Full on. Not quite Billy Ray Cyrus, but yes. You know what? It would be something simple like, you know, you're home, man, you're home. Something simple like that. After searching for so long, it's one of those moments where you feel like you found home. And I don't know if everyone feels that way or queers feel that way, but this queer felt that way. And that's when I felt it. It felt like a big part of struggling was over. Like I'm coming here tomorrow.
And the next day.
Yeah, like no hesitation in the voice. Yes, yes. Every day I am able.
Do you have any memories of the Belmont Rocks? Or maybe you had a similar kind of beach or outdoor space in your local area that I need to know about. Well, if that is the case, why don't you get in touch? I don't know why I'm being so bossy, sorry. Go to lostspacespodcast.com and find the section Share a Lost Space and tell me all about what it is you got up to. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter with the user handle Lost Spaces Pod. Find out more about Owen by visiting his website, owenkeehnen.com, following him on Instagram, where his profile is Owen Keehnen, and make sure that you go and look at the Facebook page, A Place for Us. I will include the link in the show notes for this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate if you subscribed, left a review on your podcast platform, or just told someone who you think might be interested in giving it a little listen too. I am Kay Anderson, and you have been listening to Lost Spaces.